Oh, when will we get justice? Oh, when will we get justice? Oh, no, they don't want it. No, they don't want to see no justice. They don't want it. No, they don't want to see no justice. They don't want it. No, they don't want to see no justice. They don't want it. They just want to feed destruction in the black and blue. Trying to shackle you, throw you in the orange shoe. I can't even watch the news. Watch them misinform you. The police at the fucking food. This shit ain't never cordial. No justice or no peace. My people open up the portal. Every single day since made of people out here marching. We don't vote for smoke. We want the freedom with no margins. Why is just a miss? I'm not convicted. It's disheartening. Bring your rubber bullets in your tear gas. We still marching. Got my brother PTTG and he's still marching. Got my girl Mariah leading traffic out here marching. Catch my homie Alex rolling ready out here marching. Yeah, I see you, Jackie, with a Gabby out here marching. With a David Boy, with a bro stuff out here marching. The revolution, family freedom fighting in the marches. The revolution lives on Blood Lives Matter. Don't ignore me. Our people out here dying. Just another record. When will we get justice? Oh, when will we get justice? No, they don't want it. No, they don't want to see no justice. They don't want it. And they don't want to see no justice. They don't want it. And they don't want to see no justice. They don't want it. No, they don't want to see no justice. We need allies on the front line. We've been learning for this moment, so it's crunch time. I'm talking time and time, staying truth up in these lines. They forming riot lines, looking at the police cry. It's no more love for the bacon, hope the piggies die. They like to cover all their fuck-ups, then they feed you lies. How they shoot you when you sleeping in the bed you lie. They'd rather see you lying than they see you saving lives. I had to kick your song for all the freedom fighters. It's for the ones who tired of hashtags and them candle lighters. I'm from Milwaukee, but it's looking like the Carolinas. Traffic in them caravans. In the streets is where you find us. Yeah. Take it to the streets to find the police. No justice, no peace. Yeah, take it to the streets to find the police. No justice, no peace. Yeah, when will we get justice? Oh, when will we get justice? Oh, no, they don't want it. No, they don't want to see no justice. They don't want it. No, they don't want to see no justice. They don't want it. No, they don't want to see no justice. They don't want it. They just want to be destruction in the Black lives matter. Black women matter. Protect black women. Protect black children. Protect yourselves. Fuck 12.
Google Career Certificates.
All right, what is up, everybody? How's everyone doing tonight? How's the sound? I want to make sure the sound is good for everybody. You guys could share this out. That's why I played that little theme song in the beginning there. It gives me time to do some back end things, so I'm not sitting here on my phone sharing out while you guys are staring at me. So we'll give this about a minute, and then we'll just get started. So I've shared it out everywhere. If you guys could share it as well. Give this about a minute, and then we'll get started. What's up, NSM Security? What's up, Breezy? Jan? What's up, Jennifer? April? Jess? So we're competing with the Russia-Ukraine war right now, and other streamers going live on all that. So, but we still have local things to do here, which are extremely important. Because of that, guys, so just be aware, there's probably going to be a lot of bots that are in here. I don't know how all that works, but I've seen it on other people's streams, especially with this war thing going on. There's a lot of bots that may come in and start disrupting. So our mods will take care of that. Try not to engage. Due to the basis of the topic that we're going to be covering for the next 3 days, you know, we may have some opposing viewpoints that come in and clash. That's fine. My mods will take care of that. So just make sure, you know, not to engage in all that box of crazy. What's up, Sean? All right, it's all good, brother. It's all good. Just give this less than a minute here. Make sure you guys share this out. I'm going to say it again over and over. We're limited to one platform, so we need everybody's help sharing this out everywhere on Facebook, every group you're a part of, all that. Unfortunately, we went live at the very same time as a friend of ours went live. May hurt some views. Damn wars. What's up, Ruben? Don't they have jobs? Of course they do. All right, April shared it out. Thanks, April. All right, let's get started. Hopefully some people jump in as we kind of go. One thing I will ask. So this is going to be just kind of a preface. This is going to be a 3-part series. Okay, tonight is the first part. It's a lot more of an introduction into what we're talking about. Some of you are going to be aware of some of the things that we're discussing, but we're going to be providing a lot more background and details to all of this stuff. So if there's any questions, I'm really not going to be focusing on comments. I'm not going to be stopping and like addressing everybody. So if you guys have questions, we'll do kind of a question thing after I'm done. We'll do that at the end of each of the 3 segments. So tonight, tomorrow at 7, and then also Wednesday at 7, we'll be live discussing this. So tonight is part 1 of 3. Little different for those of you that are familiar with the platform. Tonight is going to be extremely different. I scripted everything. So if it sounds like I'm reading, it's because I am. All right. Wauwatosa and the Martin Luther King Day parties. This is episode 1. So good evening, everyone. Thank you for tuning in for our 3-part series, a deep dive into Tosa'S MLK parties. Before we get too far into the stream, please be sure to hit the thumbs up and like the stream. Also subscribe and hit the bell for notifications when we go live. And please share this out to as many places as possible. For those who may be new to Never Stop Media, our platform here on YouTube, we call Never.Stop.Voices. To give you a little introduction about the company, our mission is to bring the uncensored and raw truth to the people, to tell the stories that mainstream media glosses over or completely ignores, to bring to light and expose corruption in real stories through investigative journalism. The phrase Vox Populi, which you'll see on our website, is Latin for the people's voice. We are boots on the ground journalism bringing you the truth. NSM is not ABC, NBC, Fox, or CNN. We're not the New York Times or the Washington Post. We have no corporate sponsors that decide which stories to run and how the narrative is formed. If every other news organization wants to be stenographers for law enforcement, let them. NSM doesn't write for corrupt agencies who violate people's rights on a daily basis. NSM writes for people whose rights are violated. So when law enforcement says something, we only have one question to ask. Is it true? Our investigations typically take a few months, and some, like this one, or the events surrounding Kenosha in 2020, take a lot longer. On our website, Never.Stop.Voices.com, you will find articles written exposing corruption. And here on our YouTube channel, you will find hundreds of hours of exclusive, never before seen videos, live streams of protests. Unfortunately, not all of them, as we've lost a lot because our company Facebook page was permanently removed. You'll find breaking news, trial coverage, discussions with viewers, my documenting losing everything with a pandemic, and then some more fun things I wanted to share and write about, like some of my hiking adventures. Never Stop Media is purely a viewer donation-based platform. We do not earn weekly paychecks for the thousands of hours put in researching stories, and the opportunity to research and expose stories relies solely on our viewers' contributions. A little background about me. Prior to where Never Stop Media is today, as far as journalism, I used to expose companies that were defrauding consumers within the fishing industry. In June of 2020, I lost my apartment due to the COVID pandemic, and I was homeless, stealth camping in a hammock for 63 days leading up to the shooting of Jacob Blake. I went out on day 2, commonly referred to as structure fire night. Day 3 for me was Kyle Rittenhouse night. I was on Sheridan Road. Rittenhouse ran right by me, and I watched people get shot and killed right in front of me. After the shooting, I was the only live streamer that went out every night, typically the first to arrive and the last to leave. One thing I was very big on was people's rights, and it wasn't until one of those nights filming incident after incident of people's civil rights being violated, which made me question everything. And more importantly, due to a beautiful person who most of you in the movement know as Cammie or Mimi. If it wasn't for her, I would probably not be sitting on this side of history. As you see behind me, the image of the Punisher skull. That image is there, as well as on the back of my press vest, for several reasons. First, it's a nod to Chris Kyle. Having that image on my back makes me feel safe that Chris Kyle is behind me, providing overwatch, keeping me alive. Second, it's my favorite comic book character. Third, in my own form of protest, racists, militia, and law enforcement don't get to use it as a symbol of hate. And last, if you see this symbol with me behind the camera, it's more than likely I'm there to expose corruption that will be punished. I'm most notably known for revealing the second garbage truck that was started on fire in Kenosha was done so by a Wisconsin National Guard member prior to being called to active service. The first independent journalist to be arrested in Kenosha during the curfew. The journalist responsible for releasing images of Kyle Rittenhouse holding a beer inside of Pudgy's pub that got his bond conditions modified. The journalist responsible for identifying Jump Kick Man 7 months prior, despite right-wing outlets taking credit for it. The only journalist who has sued Kenosha for open records, and the only journalist who has been publicly attacked with attempts to discredit me by the Kenosha Police Department. I blocked a $49,000 license plate reader grant with a single article. Responsible for holding the court system in the Theo Edgecombe trial accountable and fair by getting an entire 50-person jury panel removed. And most recently, taking the conspiracy theory that law enforcement worked with militia during the 2020 Kenosha unrest and exposing that it did in fact happen. I'm one of the most controversial independent journalists in the state of Wisconsin and have had to move 12 times since August 2020 due to death threats, harassment, stalking, and militia showing up where I live. And yet, here I still stand exposing corruption within systems. To lay some ground rules on our platform, keep the chat respectful. Never Stop Media does not allow threats, harassment, talking of other streamers, or shared links. Threats will be reported to authorities. No discussion of politics, no discussion of COVID. Bullying of any kind isn't allowed. Insults, racist, or degrading comments will not be tolerated. We reserve the right to delete comments or ban individuals for not following platform guidelines. We appreciate you all tuning in. There's been a lot of work that went into researching this story, speaking with witnesses, confidential sources, journalists, law enforcement, attorneys, and reading over 6,000 documents. While we were fortunate enough to gather the information that we have, there is still more to collect and more investigating to do. This has taken hundreds of hours to get us where we are today. Tonight on episode 1, we're going to talk about who the chiefs of police of Wauwatosa Police Department were from the 70s to current day. An intro to racist parties that occurred in January in the late 80s called Martin Luther King parties. We're going to discuss who the officers were that were involved in these parties and talk about their career leading up to the MLK Party investigation in order to give you background on them and why you may see similar things happening in Tosa today. We're going to talk about how the MLK parties were exposed and who these officers are, how these parties and Tosa PD practices shape the groundwork for modern day Wauwatosa. For a lot of you, the most recent news surrounding Wauwatosa that you might be familiar with is the curfew that was implemented after the Alvin Cole decision. The 3 officer-involved shooting deaths of Antonio Gonzalez, Jay Anderson Jr., and Alvin Cole by former Wauwatosa police officer Joseph Mensah. You may be familiar with the John Doe hearings performed by attorney Kimberly Motley. And most recently, a Milwaukee County judge finding probable cause to charge Joseph Mensah. But I want to take you back to the 1970s because I think this is a very pivotal point with Wauwatosa as a city, not just the police department. Wauwatosa has always been known as a predominantly white city with low crime rates. The image, which is extremely important when talking about Wauwatosa, has always maintained a high standard and a great place to raise a family, provided you are white. A common phrase that was used during the 70s through the 90s was do right, sell white. For those that may remember, in the 1950s, Wauwatosa had signs posted, restrictive zoning. We had this picture when we first went live, put it up for you guys. I'm going to be showing some pictures and documents as we go along, so bear with me as I pull these images up. The signs hung from the 1920s through the early 1960s when they were quietly taken down. The property deeds excluded non-whites from purchasing, owning, leasing, or occupying property. What I found interesting in these later years, looking at Milwaukee and Wauwatosa, speaking with a source who remembers the do right, sell white philosophy, there's this rhetoric that the downfall of Milwaukee is because of all the blacks that live here. This individual told a different story. In order to keep the areas white, more and more houses were being sold to whites who were considered white trash, he stated. Because of the class of person moving in, because of the class of person moving in was, he states, reprehensible, middle-class white and blacks were moving out. Ultimately, Milwaukee would become a poor city with lower-class whites and blacks moving into the area, and Milwaukee today remains one of the most segregated cities in the country. A lot of the officers that were coming into Wauwatosa PD were just getting out of various branches of the military and were old enough to have witnessed movements with Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, the Black Panthers, and many more. Moving a handful of years ahead from the civil rights movement, as most of us who are educated enough and don't deny history know, there was still a lot of racist carryover from that time period. A quick description of the Wauwatosa MLK parties, and we'll get into more specifics in other episodes as we go along, but from a simple description, they were racially motivated parties that officers held where they would wear black masks, eat fried chicken and watermelon, and do far worse things during these parties. As we get into the details more, we'll discuss a study that was done and a whistleblower that exposed the MLK parties and brought Wauwatosa's first black eye to the city's image, an image that would end up haunting them for the next 30 years, but would rarely be talked about publicly until 2021. As the officers that we'll discuss were coming into the force in the late 60s and early 70s, the Wauwatosa Police Department was ran by Chief John Howard. Unfortunately, there's not much that we know about Chief Howard at this point, other than seeing his name on documents. But knowing what we know about Tosa so far, I can only imagine how the department was ran during the civil rights movement era and after. After Chief Howard during the 1980s came Chief Roy Wellnitz. Under Chief Wellnitz's command is going to shape how we see policing in Wauwatosa today. So let's get into the careers of some of the officers that we know the most details about leading up to these parties. Thomas Simons plays one of the more crucial roles in Wauwatosa, the drug epidemic and combating the Black Plague and keeping Wauwatosa white. All right, bear with me. Like I said, we're going to be sharing some documents. For some of you guys, it's going to be a lot easier on a computer to see this stuff. All right, Simons was discharged from the Army in October 1969. In December 1969, he becomes a probationary patrolman, and in 1970, his probation ends. And he's now a patrolman within the Wauwatosa Police Department. From 1972 to 1975, Simons would receive several awards. Something I want to note here regarding the Purple Heart. This award is most commonly known in the military for soldiers who perform an extreme act of bravery during combat. When law enforcement and military claim the two entities don't coincide with each other, it's not exactly accurate. Originally, in the 19th century, law enforcement medals were rarely awarded. In the 20th century, law enforcement would receive medals for routine tasks such as years of service, completion of training, favorable mentions from the public, or just for being a law enforcement officer. Today, the Purple Heart is overseen by the International Chiefs of Police Association. But many years earlier, the military decided that they would open up certain types of service medals to law enforcement personnel, one of which is the Purple Heart. Hang on. This document is it's from the military. This was dated February 2nd, 1974. This is when Chief Howard was the chief of Tosa. It says, Dear Chief, each year on the occasion of George Washington's birthday, the Military Order of the Purple Heart has given a Peace Officer Award to Milwaukee County Deputy Sheriffs and Milwaukee County policemen who were wounded or killed in the line of duty. Last year, the award was extended to state troopers. This year, we would like to extend the award to all peace officers in the Milwaukee metropolitan area. I am closing a copy of the criteria. If you have any officers who would have acquired this eligibility during the past 24 months, we would be glad to include them and have your department participate as a part of this program. Would you please advise as to whether you would care to have your department participate in this program in the future, and if so, whether or not you have any officers who would be eligible for the award this year? And then there's this whole eligibility criteria. Simons has this incident in 1972. He's going to get a life-saving award for running into a burning building. But this Purple Heart, which is interesting, Simons would receive his Purple Heart for receiving injury to his leg and a broken wrist due to a scuffle while booking in someone he just arrested. Those injuries are a far cry from military personnel being injured or killed in combat. In April of 1978, Simons puts in a request to be considered for a detective position. The following month in May, he's accepted into the investigative division as a trainee. In March of 1983, he's officially promoted to detective after spending several years in the investigative division. And then there was this real fancy little article about these two officers that were promoted. One is, oops, shit. Many buttons. On the left, there is Thomas Simons, and then on the right is John Wazocevich, which we'll talk about later. By this time, he's been an accident investigator, patrolman specialist, and now detective. A little bit of an overview of Simons from 1969 to 1983. This is kind of his little resume, if you will. He ends up getting some more accommodations in 1984, and his file is filled with letters from residents thanking him for various things. During his time as detective, Simons works the late shift and does a lot of investigations with local bars, and a lot of what he's doing inside of the bars gets relayed to patrolmen, and arrests are made for DUIs, disorderly conduct, and more importantly, drug convictions. Simons would end up growing a beard and working undercover within the drug unit. I need to preface this part because it's extremely important. If we examine the stereotype regarding cocaine and crack cocaine was a black person's drug, and the black communities were blamed for starting a drug epidemic and the utter downfall of societies, and enter the myth of black criminality. But we have amazing investigative journalists like Gary Webb, who ends up exposing in the mid-90s that the CIA opened the first pipeline between Colombia's cocaine cartels and the black neighborhoods of Los Angeles. And as a result, the cocaine that flooded in helped spark a crack explosion in urban America. This was happening in the 80s and into the 90s. Later, Webb would die mysteriously, and his death would be labeled a suicide. I specifically mention this because one of Simon's arrests of black individuals, or at least what we could find, leads to an article where a Milwaukee County judge is going to make an example in order to end the Black Plague in June of 1983. A lot of people say that racism stopped with the Civil Rights Act of 1964. But here we see in 1983, blacks were still profiled as being a plague on society. Simons ends up staying undercover for quite some time within the drug unit, and in May of 1988 finds himself on the other side of the law. Now, before we get to that, I do want to read this article. So the headline reads, Judge battles Black Plague of cocaine. Calling their success a perverted version of the American dream, a federal judge Monday sentenced a former New Berlin businessman to 18 years in federal prison and an accomplice to 15 years on cocaine and firearms charges. Federal Judge Terrence T. Evans tacked on special parole terms of 3 years for both defendants. That means Richard P. Paul will not be eligible for parole for 9 years, and James E. Van Skybach for 8 years. This cocaine is going to be our version of the Black Plague unless something is done about it, Evans told the defendants. Paul, 57, formerly, and he gives his address, and Van, I can't tell if that's Skybach or Skyhawk, 49, were described by Assistant U.S. Attorney R. Jeffrey Wagner as the movers and shakers of a large-scale cocaine ring that catered to and employed Milwaukee area teenagers from January 1983 to December 1985. Prosecutors have charged that Paul threw cocaine parties for teenagers at his New Berlin home. So these guys obviously did some bad stuff, and sentenced. But there were special conditions thrown on the sentencing, and as the article says, to battle this Black Plague. Moving on. All right, so this is May of 1988. Simons and his wife were out at a reunion in West Allis and then went to a bar with another couple who owned the bar. The bar was closed, mind you, with it being after hours. They all start dancing and drinking some more. His wife, Beverly, mentions in the police report that she got a bit jealous with the closeness of the dancing between her husband and the other woman, and it was brought up in the car ride home. Simons' way of discussing his wife's feelings was to beat her repeatedly while they were driving. They get home. Simons is still beating her in the driveway. Beverly runs into the house and out the back door, gets into her vehicle, and drives herself to the hospital. Brookfield police are notified, and they come out to take a statement. They end up going to the house to arrest Simons, who was charged with a simple battery. After booking, he was released without posting bail, and since he had to work the late shift, he goes home, and Beverly is asked to leave for the night so Simons can get some sleep. We'll get more into Simons' career with the Wauwatosa Police Department in tomorrow's episode. Next up, we have David Breitlow. Breitlow is a little less significant than Simons and some of the other officers we'll talk about, but he's going to play a vital role when it comes to the MLK parties and the type of officers Wauwatosa PD likes within their organization. Breitlow joins Tosa PD as a probationary patrolman in January of 1979. This might be a little difficult to see. Like I said, this is easier to see on a computer than it would be your phone. And officially becomes a Tosa patrolman in January 1980. Something I found to be interesting and a red flag in considering Breitlow as an officer within the department is a performance review from January 1975 as a civilian aide within the Wauwatosa Police Department. So this is dated January 7th, 1975. We only have a portion of this document. But I'm going to read some of this because I think this is extremely important. Employee does not display confidence in answering questions relating to police activities or functions. And to the observer, his actions seem very unsure and would instill doubt in the viewer's mind as to his capability of completing transactions properly. Relies on other employees to stop whatever they are doing to assist him by answering simple questions and explaining simple procedures which he should have knowledge of. He has not shown competence enough to be advanced past the very basic functions. Does not make decisions on his own, either out of fear of mistakes or lack of judgment ability. Sometimes organizes work, but does not retain knowledge of procedure to perform the same tasks the following week. Has not fully mastered basic functions and does not appear to really be trying. Poor quality of work that is often done with the assist of other employees to make it acceptable. Basic functions are usually performed, but should be done in less time and with more accuracy. Deadlines are met, but time spent should be shorter. Does jobs assigned, but does not seem anxious to undertake things on his own. Does not follow suggestions and does not retain knowledge from past experiences. Can only perform one function at a time and seems lost when conditions put everyone under pressure. Cannot assist other employees because of his lack of knowledge as how and what to do. Shows no initiative or enthusiasm for the type of work he is doing at the present time. Needs improvement on spelling and basic who, what, where, when, and why. Cannot answer questions asked by citizens without continually putting them on hold and does not retain knowledge of officers' divisions or shifts. Seems unable to answer phone and perform other tasks at the same time. The officers commented it would appear that at this time the subject has no real interest in this type of job and shows no initiative, enthusiasm, or ability to retain knowledge, but rather an attitude of boredom. Now remember, this was 1975, and in 1979, he becomes a patrolman. Now, I want you to remember that performance evaluation and why what I just read is important when it comes to when we start talking about the types of people that Wauwatosa PD likes to employ, not only with just their officers, but with other people that we're going to end up talking about. There's a pattern that we found. Some of you may be thinking, wow, why would Tosa bring this guy in as an officer? Doesn't sound like he'd make a good cop. Well, the answer is simple. Not only would Breitlow share in the same belief system, but he could be counted on to not ask questions, do as he's told, not ruffle feathers, and more importantly, not question authority. That descriptive behavior will be more important when it comes to Wauwatosa police officers and their promotions throughout the next 30 years, especially under Barry Weber. Breitlow spends his career with Wauwatosa as a patrolman and one of their mountain bike officers. Another interesting thing about Breitlow is that he rides a Harley. Now, not to say that everyone who rides a motorcycle is racist, but looking at the time period and motorcycle clubs, these groups had a lot of racism within them. Next up, we have Mark Tebow. Tebow joins Wauwatosa PD as a police aide in November of 1970, and then joins the department as a probation officer in February 1973, and then becomes official in February 1974 as a switchboard operator. In 1975, he becomes a patrolman. For the most part, Tebow is pretty insignificant through the 70s and 80s. From what I can gather from his performance evaluations, he's kind of one of these officers with an attitude problem, and a quote from one of them is his own worst enemy. Tebow will get more significant later in the story. Next is going to be John Wazocevich. I hope I'm saying this dude's name right. Unfortunately, we don't have his file, so I can't tell you the details of his career. But Wazocevich is one of the most important players in the entire story. We do know he was a police aide from 1972 to 1974, a patrol officer from 1974 to 1980, an accident investigator from 1980 to 1983, and then promoted to sergeant in January of 1983. I'll get to more about him later and what his significance was. The next officer I want to talk about is Howard Bacon. Bacon enters the department a bit later than the others in February 1981 as a probationary police officer. His position becomes official in May of 1982. In September 1983, Bacon received a use of force complaint, and because the complaint was only verbal and not written, there was no investigation done, and the complaint was dismissed. So before we, yeah, Officer Bacon. So before I move further, for those of you that are filing complaints with, law enforcement departments, don't just verbalize that stuff. It needs to be done in writing. That practice is still held today. Verbal complaints do not get investigated. Also in 1983, Bacon gets deputized as a county sheriff, which I found interesting because he was a Wauwatosa police officer, kind of these double roles. In September 1984, Bacon responds to a call at a local Burger King where there are around 20 juveniles who are being disruptive and rowdy, throwing things and knocking things over. We've all seen these high school kids acting a fool inside of fast food restaurants. While the juveniles in this situation are definitely in the wrong, something about this letter of thanks from personnel at Burger King that stood out to me was this comment. So what you're seeing on the screen here is a letter from a Burger King at Mayfair Mall, or near Mayfair Mall, 725 North Mayfair, if that's even still there. But the comment that's written in here, I refuse to call them young men. They were animals. Now, I can only speculate as to the race of the juveniles, since there was no official report done and they were pulled to the side and spoken to. But taking the context of the year, white juveniles are generally not referred to as animals. And it reminded me of a comment Sheriff David Beth in Kenosha made about black shoplifters who were caught. And during a press conference, he called them animals who deserve to be locked in cages. In September of 1985, Bacon would receive a commendation for an arrest of 2 black individuals who were driving suspiciously. Now, the arrest did turn up that the vehicle was stolen out of Brown Deer, but there was nothing that alerted the officer to that other than the alleged suspicious driving. Now, keep in mind, Wauwatosa wants to protect their white city, especially when blacks cross the Milwaukee-Tosa border. And that border, as a lot of you will know, is still an issue today. We'll get into more details how that border got so protected later in the story. The last officer I want to talk about, and one of my favorite because he is the most interesting to me due to his career and programs he implements not only within the Wauwatosa Police Department, but for the city itself. We'll really get into his career later in the story, but for now, this officer is James Zalewski. Zalewski joins the department in January of 1968. In July 1975, he's promoted to patrolman specialist. He also gets a promotion to intelligence officer and is responsible for internal investigations. In March 1976, he's promoted to detective. Also in March, Zalewski becomes a Division of Standards instructor, which I found to be a bit comical knowing what I know about these officers in the Wauwatosa Police Department. May of 1981, promoted to sergeant, and then February 1986, he's promoted to lieutenant. As you can see, Zalewski is moving up the ranks very quickly. I'm going to go back to this one. One thing I want to point out, and this is just an example. Let's see if I can. At the bottom, towards the bottom of this performance evaluation, this is on Howard Bacon's, one of his from 1982. But as you can see, James Zalewski is a supervisor directly over Bacon. Going through all the files, Zalewski is a direct supervisor for all of the officers involved in the MLK parties and spent a considerable amount of time with them in the squad cars. Zalewski's career, which we'll detail more in the second episode, is going to pave the way for modern-day Wauwatosa regarding evidence storing, their department computer system, squad computer system, and the Tosa-Milwaukee border, and the Wauwatosa Neighborhood Watch. Chief Howard ends up leaving the department and ends up passing away in October of 2006. The next chief to enter the department during the 1980s is Chief Roy Wellnitz. Now, unfortunately, we don't have access to either of their personnel files, and it's extremely time-consuming and costly trying to track down information in old articles. The only information we have at this time is from officers' personnel files with documents that have their names on them. One thing we do know about Wellnitz is he conveniently dies in a car accident shortly after Weber becomes chief. Now, there's a reason I say conveniently dies, and I want you to remember this during the third episode when we talk about the real story behind some very serious Wauwatosa issues. In 1989, Wauwatosa City Council orders a study to be done in the Wauwatosa Police Department regarding police operations. One of the things they determined in the study was that 17 positions should be eliminated within the Wauwatosa Police Department. The study also determined that Chief Roy Wellnitz needed to be removed, as his form of leadership within the department was questionable. What we know is that the 17 positions were not eliminated due to pushback from the police department. It gets revealed that Chief Wellnitz is living outside the district and he gets pushed out. He appeals and he's able to keep his job during the appeal process, but ultimately it doesn't work. The narrative created by the department, which gets eagerly fed to mainstream media, is that Wellnitz violated the department's policy of living within the district to remain chief. The real story, according to sources, is that he was asked to leave so the department and the Police and Fire Commission could avoid questions on issues that were about to be exposed. During all of this, the study, pushing Chief Wellnitz out, these articles that are being written, Captain Fred Basting gets promoted to interim chief, while the city of Wauwatosa does a national search for a new chief. We don't have Basting's personnel file, and it appears he has since passed, but I like Basting. In this time period, 1989 into 1990, a clerk within the Wauwatosa Police Department named John Cutts is about to add to the controversy. Cutts ends up being a whistleblower and exposes that in January of 1988, January 1989, and I originally wrote, and very likely January 1990, that has been confirmed now, that the officers that we already talked about, and 13 in total, are engaged in the racist Martin Luther King parties. From going through the documents and what we've learned so far, It almost appears that while Basting is a captain, he's aware of what's going on, but his hands are tied under Chief Wellnitz. When he gets promoted to interim chief, he takes advantage of his new power and suspends everybody that was involved. And all of this ends up being made public, and several news articles get written about it. The 13 officers within the Wauwatosa Police Department that get suspended are James Zalewski, John Wazocevich, Thomas Simons, David Breitlow, Howard Bacon, Mark Tebow, John Laffey, Mark Presper, Roger Martins, Fred Karski, Michael Regals, Jeffrey Pruss, and Daniel Collins. We believe, based on confidential sources, that there were several more officers involved, which we'll get into later in the story. On tomorrow's episode, we're going to discuss the suspensions. We now have documents showing their suspension details, more in-depth details about John Cutts. We have documents showing the threats and intimidation tactics that he ends up having to deal with. The appeal the officers file. We have those documents. The Police and Fire Commission report that we have a copy of. Lawsuits that get filed, which we have documents of. We have some old articles that will show. And then an intro to Barry Weber, who gets hired as this chief who is going to clean up Wauwatosa Police Department right in the middle of a major controversy. We're going to talk about how Weber immediately finds himself being investigated by the Police and Fire Commission, something he's never admitted to, for his role in the threats and intimidation. So at this time, just because I don't want to bore people with so many facts and all of that, we're going to get more into details tomorrow. Tomorrow there's a lot to talk about. It's a lot to unpack. But I wanted tonight's episode to kind of be a little intro to all of this. So as of right now, I'll kind of open it up to any questions that you guys may have in regards to what we've talked about so far. You know, like I said, there's so much to unpack that I didn't have a choice but to break this up into multiple days here. I will put up an article. I'm going to show this article tomorrow. I'll give you guys a little sneak peek. So, and like I said, we'll get into way more detail in regards to the MLK parties tomorrow, what they were, what they entailed, things that we found out that were never reported in any articles that were written, details that only people who attended would have known. We'll go through the entire Police and Fire Commission decision, all the suspensions, kind of how all of that stuff works. And we'll talk about this article tomorrow as well. But this is kind of describing the Police and Fire Commission. You know, people are going to end up having to testify. They're going to go to these prohibitive practice hearings. And this is about to become just a massive, massive ordeal for Tosa. All right, so I'll spend like the next half an hour on answering questions about things we've gone over so far. if you guys have some questions in general or whatever. And then, like I said, tomorrow at 7 p.m. we'll go live again. Tomorrow will definitely be longer than tonight. There's a lot to unpack on day 2 and day 3. What's up, Shaquana? To kind of give you guys like a little thing for tomorrow. We're going to talk about so with these MLK parties, I know I just kind of teased you a little bit there, but we're going to talk about things that happened during the parties, what the flyers said, where some of these parties were held. There's other locations that have never been reported in articles written by journalists back in that day. Is it actually Bacon? What's the spelling? Yes, it's actually that. Bacon. Howard Bacon. Yes. I know the irony of the last name. We're going to talk about tomorrow. We're going to talk about threats and intimidation that John Cutts received. We're going to show you one of those letters. We're going to get in very, very kind of graphic detail regarding the suspensions, what they were suspended for, and where all these officers kind of play a role in all this. Now, unfortunately, like I said, there were 13 officers that were involved. We know that there were more. It's extremely costly trying to get access to personnel files, and you need really cool lawyers to get stuff or, have big crazy arguments with these departments. So, but the harassment and the intimidation tactics that are being done to John Cutts, we're going to kind of go through some pretty important levels of harassment and threats, intimidation, not only with him, but with others. Nikki says it would not surprise me if these sort of things still happen and all over the country. Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me either. And something that we'll, believe, discuss tomorrow. I believe it's tomorrow. So these things obviously happened in the late 80s, and there's a particular thing that happens at that time that happened last year to protesters, as well as Tosa residents. So we'll get into that stuff tomorrow as well. So like I said, today was a little teaser, kind of get you guys into it, ease you in. There's a lot to unpack tomorrow and the next day. There's going to be some pretty horrific things that we're going to be exposing. So, but yes, Ruben, it's spelled Bacon, Bacon. And on day 3, we're going to talk about something else with Officer Bacon that's even more ironic than the name. What else? Any questions? Anything that was talked about? Breezy. So make sure you guys like the stream. Share it out, please. People need to see this. I'm not going to be writing an article on this until we're done completely. Facebook has crashed. What does that mean? Like Facebook went down or what? I don't know. My Facebook works. They don't like you. Yeah, I don't know. My Facebook works. But yeah, make sure you guys hit that thumbs up. Make sure you like the stream. Please share it out. We're only on our website, Never.Stop.Voices.com. That's where we write all of our articles, which for a lot of people is a little bit easier to digest than I am. This was very different than some of our normal live streams. We're a bit abrasive on the platform. If you guys want to help support the channel and everything that we do here, there's some pinned links in the comment section. Nikki says, I knew that. They don't like me either. Our company page got permanently banned on Facebook, so whatever. So our reach is a little bit limited. So, we rely very heavily on you guys to share this stuff out. So tomorrow we're going to be showing a lot of articles. We're going to be showing a lot more of the personnel files that we'll actually read, because some of the documents that are in there are pretty important. We'll show some pictures for those of you that like looking at pictures. But yeah, tomorrow at 7, it'll be a little bit longer. What else? Any of the 12 people watching have a question? Want something clarified that we talked about? Want to see something again? There's not too many questions. I'm going to jump off. I still got to finish up with some other stuff. I'll probably show you, let's see. Show you what these guys look like. You want to see that? No, soon. Too soon for Mensa. I will say, though, that some people that were involved were very close to Mensa. I don't know if you guys can see this pretty well on your screens. So this is Howard Bacon. That's what he looked like in 1982. This is what he looked like in 2003. Let's see. I think we have some of their other. Breitlow's file was interesting. We'll get into some of this tomorrow, but since we mentioned it today. So there's David Breitlow. This is the officer that just doesn't care. So that's what he looked like back in the day. That shows up pretty good on the phone. We'll go through with some of the officers, things like this, different certifications that they have, how these things end up becoming pertinent in their careers. We'll show stuff like that. This is all of, it's hard to see, but this is all of Breitlow's bicycle training, basic police mountain bike course. So they had bike cops way back in the day too. They're all hard to see. I think Simons has pictures. One thing we can do. No planting evidence course. We're going to get into planting evidence on people. It'll be in day 3. Let's go. .602. So we talked about this. So this is with Thomas Simons. This is the undercover drug detective. So this is the police report out of the city of Brookfield. So May 15th, 1988, I was dispatched to EMH to take a complaint of a battery to a female at the emergency room. I arrived at the emergency room at EMH and talked with the victim in this matter, ID'd as blank Simmons. Date of birth is redacted. At the time I was there, I did notice swelling around both of her eyes, and her nose also was swollen with a small cut on the bridge of her nose. Both eyes appeared to be turning black and blue at the time. She also complained of pain in the forehead and starting to get a headache. She further stated that she was struck in the stomach area of her body. However, this did not hurt at all, and she believes that there was no damage done there. X-rays were taken by the hospital and did come negative to any broken bones. Mrs. Simmons related the following to me. She and her husband had gone to a reunion on Saturday evening at the Tyrolean Townhouse in West Allis. She stated that after the reunion, she and her husband and another couple went to a tavern in West Allis owned by the other male subject. The tavern was closed. However, they did do some dancing and had a few more drinks at this tavern. Mrs. Simmons stated that she may have become a little jealous due to the type of closeness of the dancing when they changed partners at the tavern. While they were driving home after being at the second place, she stated that she brought up the matter of the way he was dancing with this other female. Not in a shouting manner. She just wanted to talk about it. She stated that he suddenly started hitting her while he was driving their vehicle with the backhand motion across the left side of her face. This occurred in approximately the area of 145th and Capitol Drive. She stated that at one point she made believe that she was unconscious to possibly get him to stop hitting her. However, she stated that he kept striking her as they were driving along. When they arrived home at the Camfield address, which is near the intersection of Calhoun and Lisbon, she did get out of the car and was attempting to unlock the door. He continued to hit her after she was terrified. When she got inside the house, she was afraid that he would keep this up. She then walked straight through the house, through the laundry room, back out to the outside, took her vehicle, and drove to EMH. Mrs. Simons at the residence, Mrs. Simons stated that she was also concerned about her adult children who were sleeping at the residence at the time. One is 21 years of age and the other is 18 years of age. At the hospital, I asked Mrs. Simons if she would be willing to write out a statement of what had occurred for the record. She stated that she would. Statement that she made is attached to this CR. Also, consent for the disclosure of information from EMH was made out and signed by her and is attached to this CR. The clothing that Mrs. Simons was wearing was checked. However, all was intact, no tears. The only thing is that there was blood on the upper part of her dress, possibly either from the small cut or a bloody nose. They also took 3 photos of the face of Mrs. Simons, photos numbers 8, 9, and 10 on roll number 1 of the department camera. While we were at the hospital, contact was made with the Waukesha County Social Services, and she did talk with parties from there. Corporal Laskowitz report will identify who she talked with. It was determined by her and the party that she talked with that she would return home. She also was not fearful of her husband at this time. She stated that once he settles down, there should be no problem. Mrs. Simons was taken back to her residence by myself and left at the residence. She did state that she would possibly attempt to contact our police social worker on the matter this week. On Sunday, May 15th, 88, 6:58 a.m., our department received a call from EMH stating that they were treating a female named Simons, female white, date of birth is redacted, for injuries that were reportedly inflicted by her husband, Thomas A. Simons. The victim had advised hospital personnel that her husband was now at home on Camfield Drive and that she was concerned about the safety of a son and daughter that were presently in the house with the husband. The ages of the two children are 18 and 21. At that time, a dispatch officer, Tim, I don't know how to say the name, Lasila, to the hospital to interview the victim and sent officers Ben Koch and Gary Mueller to the residence on Camfield Drive to observe the house while I attempted to learn more about the suspect by calling his place of employment, etc. Later, Officer Lasila advised me of the extent of the injuries to Mrs. Simons and indicated that she was being x-rayed and treated for a bruised nose and 2 puffed or blackened eyes. She had also indicated that she had been struck in the stomach. According to Mrs. Simons, an incident like this happened before, and she stated that she didn't want it to happen again. She submitted a statement to Officer Lasila indicating the chain of events that started in the area of 145th and Capitol Drive and culminated at the residence on Camfield Drive. Her husband reportedly kept striking her as she entered the house. She immediately went in and then left through a back or side door. She went to her car and drove herself to EMH. Upon my arrival at the residence, I advised officers Ben Koch and Gary Mueller that I would attempt to contact the suspect from the squad phone as we observed the residence. The phone call was answered by a daughter named, and that's redacted, 18 years of age. She was awakened by my call and stated that she had been in bed since 10:30 p.m. and was completely unaware of the incident involving her parents. She advised me that she neither heard nor saw anything during the night. Also in the house was a son, 21 years of age, who was later interviewed and indicated that he came home sometime after midnight, but neither heard nor saw anything regarding the incident. When speaking to Redacted via the squad phone, I asked her where her dad was at the present time. She replied that he was sleeping on a couch in the living room. I advised Darcy to wake her brother and that they should leave the residence and meet me at my squad after describing my location, which they did. After some discussion with Redacted, the son, he felt that he'd be able to wake his dad by going back into the house. We discussed any weapons in the house and their location. Steve indicated that he knew the location of one weapon and was advised to hide it before he awakened his dad. I also advised him that when he entered, I would be calling the residence and that he should pick up the phone and leave it off the receiver before he does anything else so that I might hear any conversation taking place. He did the above. I heard him awaken his father and tell him to meet us in the driveway, which he did. Officer Koch and I met Mr. Simons in the driveway and advised him of the complaint. At that point, I also advised Mr. Simons of his rights as per the Miranda warning read from the card and that he was being arrested for battery. Mr. Simons said nothing further at this point except that he did not wish to make any statement. He was very cooperative otherwise and was placed in Officer Ben Koch's car and conveyed to headquarters. At headquarters, he was booked by Officers Koch and Mueller. When asked if he would leave the residence for the day, he indicated that he couldn't do so because he had to sleep today since he will be working the late shift tonight. I also had phone contact with the victim, Mrs. Simons, who was about to be released from EMH. We discussed my calling someone from the battered women's organization and a possibility of her staying with them for a period of time. Mrs. Simons at the time advised me that she still wished to go home, even though her husband is being released and would go home also. She didn't feel that any problem would reoccur. I contacted Mrs. Sherry something of the Battered Women's Association. I advised her of the situation and the fact that I was trying to persuade Mrs. Simons to stay away from the house at least for a day or so. Mrs. O, we'll call her because I can't pronounce the name, said that she would call the victim at the hospital and make her aware of all the alternatives available in regard to places for her to stay. She made the call and spoke to Mrs. Simons, but Mrs. Simons did not change her mind. I discussed her decision with Mrs. O later. She felt that there was nothing else that could be done to force the couple to live apart for a while at this point in time. The alternatives were made known to Mrs. Simons. In speaking to Mr. Simons before he was released, he repeatedly stated that there would be no further problems. He was conveyed back to his residence after being released on his own recognizance at about 10:15 a.m. Mrs. Simons had already been released from the hospital and was at home at the time that Mr. Simons was taken home. Just prior to this time, I had called the Simons residence and spoke to the daughter once again. She advised me that she would be home today and that she would advise our department immediately if the problem reoccurs or begins to recur. Other evidence obtained in regards to this complaint are photos taken by Officer Tim Lasila of the victim while at EMH and a statement taken from Mrs. Simons by Officer Tim Lasila while at the hospital. Mr. Time Simons refused to make out a statement. There were no statements taken from the son and daughter because they advised all officers that they were completely unaware of the fact that any part of the incident had occurred until I had called them by phone. It should also be noted that the couple had been out at a reunion party during the night. Both had been drinking, and that the incident occurred at approximately 5:30 a.m. while they were en route back to the residence and on Capitol Drive from a tavern located in the West Dallas area. So yeah, that was the police report. And they're gonna continue to have some issues. So Nikki says, "What? No way. Planting evidence?" Yes. Yeah, we'll get into that story on day 3. Tosa'S gonna hate me. That's all right. What else? Any other questions about anything we've talked about tonight? Make sure you guys tune in tomorrow at 7. Like I said, tonight, little intro, kind of easy guys into this. Tomorrow's going to be a lot to unpack, a lot to talk about, a lot of documents to show. Anything? Nothing else? I'm going to go. I got stuff to do. Make sure you guys like this. Share this out, please, everywhere. I know a lot of people are consumed with this war. Unfortunate timing. But, we still have local things to do here that still need to be talked about and exposed and all of that. So just so you guys. If you guys haven't seen, let's see. So tomorrow we'll discuss the details of the MLK parties, specifics on the officers' suspensions, details on the whistleblower, John Cutts, and the threats and intimidation that he received. Some real stories about that, not just what narrative Tosa PD put out to mainstream media. We'll We'll talk about the Police and Fire Commission report, which is extremely important. The officers' appeals, multiple lawsuits that were filed. We'll talk about Barry Weber's Police and Fire Commission investigation. If you guys remember, Weber has never admitted to ever being investigated by anybody. That's a lie. We'll reveal some other officers that were involved. And then on day 3, we're going to discuss, we're going to talk about promotions, why they happen, especially when it comes to people like this or other very critical incidents that happen. We'll discuss, in addition to suspensions and things, how they get covered up. We'll talk about who trained Wauwatosa PD, the command that's in place right now. We'll talk more about Barry Weber, and specifically deception and hiding crimes in Wauwatosa. Day 3, we're also going to talk about the whites for Wauwatosa and who is potentially behind it. Some of you may remember some letters that went out last year, and Tosa PD said they would investigate. They never did. We will talk about the real story behind Detective Robin Schumacher's felony conviction, the real story behind Officer Jen Sabina's murder, and an incident that happened before Mark Finken committed suicide. So that gives you guys a little bit of an insight. All right. Nothing else? No other comments, questions, anything? I'm going to jump off. I got some other work to do. Again, please make sure you guys subscribe. Hit the bell for notifications. Also go in your settings and make sure that your notifications are turned on. It won't matter if you hit the bell. If the notifications in your setting is turned off, you'll never know when we go live. So make sure you guys subscribe. If you want to join and become a member, there's exclusive member videos that get put up. Members get first access to any videos that we do upload. And if you want to support the work that we do here, there's some links in the pinned comments or scrolling across the bottom. All right, with that, I'm gonna be out. I got some preparing to do for tomorrow's live stream. Make sure you guys tune in again, same time, 7 p.m. And a lot to unpack tomorrow. So I'll see you guys tomorrow.